love the Inside Out franchise. I don't think that's a particularly controversial thing to say, is it? The reality is that in my eyes, it's probably the best body of work that Pixar's ever put out. The first film is a bona fide masterpiece. When it was released, I think it signaled a bit of a turning point for the studio. They'd had that golden run from the studio's debut in 1995 from Toy Story 1 all the way to Toy Story 3 in 2010. While some of the films were more memorable than others in that time, they never really put together a string of duds or forgettable films. Then we came to the early 2010s. Cars 2 was a dud, no doubt about that. I think it absolutely has to be the worst Pixar film that's ever been made. And it didn't even have the decency to do well at the box office to offset how bad it is. This was followed up with Brave and Monsters University, which are by no means bad. In fact, I think they're both great movies and they did well for themselves. It's just, when you think of the truly great Pixar films of the past, these are two films that get well and truly forgotten. Then Inside Out came out and we were suddenly staring down the barrel of yet another golden run. I mean, we can ignore The Good Dinosaur, sure, but then we had Finding Dory, then Cars 3. Moving on, we then had Coco, Incredibles 2, Toy Story 4. Massive hits, both critically and commercially for the studio. I also think that this was the first movie that started that whole real Pixar movie movement, if you get what I mean. When the internet collectively started to become more and more pretentious about Pixar movies and how they were clearly so much better than all the other studios. These are real art house movies that all ages can watch, whilst Disney and Illumination etc. is just trash for little kiddies. This discussion would later pivot to, this doesn't feel like a real Pixar movie, whenever they didn't like the creative direction, i.e. Turning Red. Regardless, Inside Out. The franchise then went dormant for a good decade until just this year we got the release of Inside Out 2, which was a game changer for the studio, bringing Pixar back into the limelight and the box office top charts with a massive record-breaking gross of almost $1.7 billion. Absurd numbers, but it's a nostalgic classic, so who's really surprised? The franchise is back, baby. Then we got the release of Dream Productions on Disney+. Once again, I loved this show. A mockumentary spoof of Hollywood using the medium of dreams introduced a bunch of new characters. It didn't really seem to get all that much hype, if we're being honest. It's really seemed to fly under the radar, and when I made my video talking about it originally, I didn't really see all that much discussion about it online, which is a massive shame to me, because I think it's one of the best spin-offs that Pixar has ever made, and was just as clever and rich in storytelling as the films were. The perfect tie-in, really. With all that out of the way, I need to say this. On this channel, I love to nitpick. I love to randomly find the silliest things that I can and pick at them to see if they're actually genuinely good, if they make sense, or if they're just ridiculous. It's all in good fun for me, but that's just how I am. So today I want to sort of take a look a little deeper into the world of Inside Out and what goes on inside Riley's head, especially given there's actually a rather big throwaway line in the show itself that really changed everything I thought I knew about the world in which the show takes place. Let me set the scene for you. Over the course of the show, the two lead characters, Zenny and Paula, team up to work on a new dream. The reason for this is twofold. Paula to reinvigorate her dying career, and Zenny to try to get his big moment, his big break. This all goes wrong though, as they struggle to work together mostly due to Paula's stuck-in-her-way attitude, which results in disaster when the dream they're filming causes Riley to begin to sleepwalk, which interrupts the dreams of her parents too. When being dressed down by their boss, Gene, it's referenced that she has had contact with the other studios, and that they're angry the dad's sports dream was interrupted. Immediately, this had me pretty surprised about everything, because this means the little worlds inside the heads of the different human characters are in contact with one another, which in turn opened up a lot of questions for me. When we first got a glimpse into the world of Inside Out, it very much felt like the mind of each character was a self-contained place. When the movie starts, we see that Joy seemingly just appeared inside Riley's mind out of nowhere, and instinctively she knew what was going on, and who she was, what her purpose was. Then the other emotions seemed to appear out of nowhere as well. The only time one of them randomly appearing was ever challenged is when anxiety and the others arrive, and they've already set up a plan to take over, back in the outside world of Riley's mind, beyond the headquarters. On top of that, later on, nostalgia turns up to try to get involved and is brushed off by the other emotions, so clearly all the emotions that Riley's going to need over the course of her life, they're already there waiting for her. You could argue though that they all just came into existence at the exact same time though. You can explain it away in that film. And it felt that same way for all the other different minor characters, the neurons and thoughts and whatnot. That they all live in this self-contained world and know exactly what they're supposed to do with their lives. They have a mandated role that began when they came into the world, came into her mind. Dream Productions changes things though and makes me very confused. For starters, can we talk about Zenny real quick? I didn't think about this until just a moment ago, but he's claimed as the nephew of the head of Dream Studios. They reference his father, Gene's brother. How does that work? Brothers and sisters, I guess I can understand. They came into existence together or something along those lines. But a kid, that changes things, doesn't it? So these little neurons have lives of their own civilization, disconnected from Riley for the most part. Do they get pregnant, have families, romantic relationships? They seem to eat food. They have food. I mean, why else would Zenny be working in a coffee house after he gets fired from the studio by his aunt? They literally make food and coffee to be consumed. But where do the ingredients come from? Do they get thought up, or are there farms and whatnot out in the wilderness of Riley's mind? Do these things have money, an economy? What other industries exist here? How do the non-emotions decide who's going to be in charge of things? What's the hierarchy? Beyond headquarters, is there some sort of political structure? Elections? Leaders? Do they have schools or other educational facilities or systems? Fast food joints? Franchises? Hospitals? They clearly have some sort of media system in place, as there are Dream reviews, but do they also have TV for their own society too? Made exclusively for them, like news and whatnot? Entertainment just for the mind people and not for Riley's consumption. What level of society do you think we're dealing with here? Side tangent here, but I do want to ask. Do you think that the Dream Studios have always been represented by a film studio that resembles Hollywood from the very beginning? Is this something that forms based on the era? Or did early camera designers and filmmakers remember their own lucid dreams, and that's how Hollywood started to form? Or would pre-film Dream Studios resemble stage plays with a magical audience pit that acts as the gateway to the human who's dreaming? I need to know! On top of that, there's the conundrum of free will in this world, as we see through the character of Zenny himself. He has dreams of his own, to be a big-time director. So does Paula's original assistant from the beginning of the film. She doesn't just want to be an assistant director anymore. She actually wants to be somebody and go beyond what her original career path was. On top of that, Zenny briefly fails at his dream. And Paula almost does too. They nearly flunk out completely. Plus, there's the coffee shop guy. Is this his mandate? Did he awaken in Riley's mind knowing he was going to be a coffee maker? Or is that something that developed over time for him? The thing is, though, that this idea of free will and choice in career path seems to run counter to what we see from the emotions. Joy, sadness, anger, disgust, fear, hell, even all the new ones. They know their role and they have it immediately. These, I don't even know what they are, the beings, what are they? They seem to have full-on lives of their own beyond just the upkeep of Riley's brain. They have romances, hopes and dreams, careers, life issues. They still have that connection to Riley like the emotions do, but it feels more remote. She's part of their life, but unlike the emotions whose sole existence seems to center on her completely and utterly, these guys have their own society, which I find to be rather insane. Plus, they have personalities and emotions. Are there little people inside their heads too? What's going on here? How far does it go? How deep does it go? On top of that, how does age work for these things? Riley's only a teenager during the time of Dream Productions. Many of these things have clearly been adults the entire time. They're seemingly in this state of unchanging existence unless they fall into that memory pit, or I guess if the person they're in dies. How does this fly with characters like Zenny though, who are presented as young? What is the aging process that we're dealing with? Do these things get born and then rapidly age to adulthood? He clearly has developed as a person over the time that he's existed. Originally he was called Kenny, but now he calls himself Zenny as part of his persona. It's quite the conundrum to me. Honestly, the more I'm thinking about it, the more my head's starting to hurt. But it also makes me more eager for even more of this sort of content that explores the inner world of Riley's mind away from the main characters in headquarters. I hope this show did well, because this is the type of stuff I want to see. But wait, there's more! More that makes me question what the hell's going on. As I referenced earlier, within the story itself we learn for the first time ever that it's possible to contact the inner workings of somebody else's mind. Riley's dad's Dream Studios sent an official complaint to the headquarters of Riley's mind, with anger then ripping the head of the studio, Gene, a new one, over the phone. One of the cool parts of the franchise is that even with all these different gimmicks, they're able to link it back to a real thing that humans experience and can relate to as a viewer. Here, I do wonder how it works and how contact between different brains is possible without the use of their humans as the link. One possibility I was thinking of is, you know when you're talking to somebody and you both have that exact same thought or whatnot, and you say it out loud at the exact same time to the point that it seems spooky? Or when it feels like somebody legitimately has read your thoughts? Would it be a similar phenomenon here? Where the explanation they're providing is that the emotions or the thoughts got on the phone to the other mind and information was passed along. So now we know that they can have contact between minds, which is honestly a bit of a game changer to me and opens up so many different questions and possibilities. The foremost amongst these being, can you leave a person's mind and go elsewhere? Is that a possibility for you? Are the mind people able to go on holiday or migrate? When something like dementia or simply old age is setting in and people are losing their faculties, whether they're mental or physical, would that simply be the world decaying? Or is it these people starting to flee en masse to avoid the sinking ship, so to speak, when the person dies? Maybe this could explain how there are many different generations of these little purple mind people, even though Riley's only a young teenager herself. Maybe they migrate and that's why. Although I think you could give a counterpoint to this, in that every character within the mind itself seems wildly loyal to Riley. When Zenny goes out of his way to ruin Paula's film, he ends up repenting for no other reason than because a dream like this would upset Riley. Not ruin her life, not destroy her mind, just make her upset. If they wouldn't do that, I don't think they'd abandon her either. So now, I'm just back to square one. I'll be honest, I need to call it there before my brain melts out my ears. I came here for answers, and as I talked this through, I simply thought of more and more questions. Maybe it will be addressed one day. Probably not though. And so with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of my rant, my screed? Are you on board with me? Do you think my questions are valid, or do you think I'm thinking too much into it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.